Well, welcome everyone. At this time, we'll call to order the Wednesday, October 21st, 2020 Land Management Committee of the Diversion Board of Authority. Roll call. Make sure we've got a quorum here.
Mrs. Shirley.
I am here.
Mayor Judd. Mr. Grubb.
Here.
Mr. Campbell. Mr. Borboom.
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson. Mr. Olson.
Here.
Mr. Breitling.
Here.
Ms. Mongeau. Mrs. Preston. Mr. Zimmerman.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
We have a quorum. Wonderful. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope everyone's well. You have before you the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? If not, a motion to approve the agenda, please.
So
Olson moves.
I'll second. This is Zimmerman.
Thank you, Roger, and then Bob. And then on to the minutes of September 30th. Are there any additions, corrections, changes to the minutes? Or a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Nathan. I'd move to approve.
Thank you, Nathan. Is there a second?
Bruce Grubb, second.
Thank you, Bruce. All those opposed to approving the minutes, say aye. And the motion carries. On to item number 4, property acquisition status report. And I believe I saw that Mr. Dodds has joined us. Are you going to do that, or is Rocky?
Hi, Mary. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Welcome.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting off of an airplane, but I think I can cover most of this. Dean and Rocky are on as well, and they can maybe help fill in some details. Anyway, in your packet is the usual monthly land status report. I think most of you are all familiar with that. As usual, I'll just point out a few items for your awareness. On page 6 of the report is the overall status map. I always like to point out the number of parcels we've acquired to date. We're up to 414. So that if you recall last month, I think we were at just over 400. So we continue to add 5 to 10 parcels each month. You'll also notice that we have filed last resort eminent domain actions on 12 properties as of the date of this report. And so unfortunately, we've had to resort to that as part of the process. I would also just point out that the purple shaded boxes on that map are purchase agreements that are signed. At the time of this map, we do have 10 purchase agreements that have been signed. So again, kind of a demonstration of progress being made. And then the last thing maybe I would point out is we do have a number of appraisals that are pending. It's been a while since we've had appraisals being produced, but with the drain wetland project and with the Red River control structure, we do have a few appraisals that are pending, and we're expecting to see those back later this year. The next page in the report just shows the environmental monitoring easements. We're also working on appraisals for the outstanding easements that are needed. Currently, we do have rights of entry for everything that was necessary this year, and we're getting appraisal reports for the remaining easements on those. The rest of the report shows drills into each area and shows individual statuses. I guess happy to take any questions or go through those in more detail if people would like.
Thank you, Eric. I have one question. Now, there's been several properties that have come before the Cass County Commission for the quick take eminent domain process. What's the time frame after they leave Cass County? How long
So,
before there's any sort
yeah,
of decision?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Chris McShane may be on and he may be able to help provide some more context as well. Generally speaking, after the county grants authorization for the joint board to file a quick take action, there's a little bit of processing time that Onsted Twitchell needs. They can process those relatively quickly if need be, but generally it's probably a week or two. Then they file a deposit with the court. The deposit is in the amount of the last written offer. And once the court has that deposit, they have a court system or a court number assigned to each acquisition. And then it really sort of goes into a process where there will be discovery, there'll be a hearing. I think Chris can probably chime in and talk more details about that. My sense is it could be months before any, real court process takes shape. And of course, we're continuing to try to negotiate during that time frame, if we can try to reach a settlement. Now, Chris, or if you're on, maybe you want to add a few more details.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and a good question, Commissioner Sherling. The process after the county is involved is that allows Cass County Joint to move forward with the eminent domain of last resort, and part of that is to reach out to any attorneys that are representing landowners, and that's where we're at with several of these, where we want to try to figure out the logistics, and if there's things that we can do to simplify it, we want to do that ahead of time. And then on top of that, what we've been doing is filing the action with the county, the clerk of court, and getting a file number. We have been then trying to serve the complaint in the action, so that the landowners have that before they get any communications from the clerk of court. Once we get service, then the clerk of court, then we deposit with the clerk of court, and the clerk of court will then send a notice of deposit out to the landowner. As Eric said, if necessary, we can speed that process up, and skip the communication with opposing counsel, and instead just go right to a lawsuit and a deposit. We could also skip the process of trying to serve first and then deposit second, and instead we could deposit immediately after filing our action and getting a court file date. But up until this point, there hasn't been a necessity that would require acquiring the right of way in that short of order. So instead, we're doing our best to try to keep the landowners as informed of the process as possible, and make the eminent domain of last resort process as clean as possible. Like for example, one set of landowners have a very common name, and there are judgments against people with the same common name out there. And we wanted to make sure that we got those judgment creditors eliminated from the action before we even started it. So we got an affidavit from the landowners and through their attorney to avoid having to include creditors like Chase Bank and Wells Fargo and others like that, because that would just make the whole thing more complicated. But then with respect to once the action is started and is moving forward, it's treated just as the same as any kind of a regular civil action, and the courts in North Dakota and in Minnesota for that matter have been quite delayed and pushed back because of the COVID situation and all of the trials that were scheduled and have been pushed back and continued. So before we get an actual trial decision from a jury, it's going to be quite some time. And part of that is due to the court system. Part of that is due to the landowners need an opportunity to get an appraisal that they can use in the court system. And all of that takes some time. Any further questions, Commissioner Shirley?
No, thank you. That certainly explains it. Does anybody else have any questions for either Chris or just in general for the land acquisitions? All right then, thank you. Eric, did you have anything else?
No, nothing else on that report.
All right. Thank you very much. Then we will move on to item number 5, a recommendation to sell some property. And Eric, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll introduce this. Dean and Steve Link with Pipers are on with us as well, I believe, and they might be able to help answer some questions if there are any. As you see in your packet, there's a cover letter basically recommending that we sell some property, and then there's a map attached to that letter that outlines the property we're referencing. Several years ago, we started negotiations on a large horse barn facility and adjacent residence and some other outbuildings in northern Richland County. We were able to purchase that property. There was, at the time, up until recently, there's been quite a bit of uncertainty on exactly where the impacts from the project are. And so that property owner was requesting a buyout. I think the property owner actually attended 1 or 2 land committee meetings in the past and sort of pled her case for a buyout. And so ultimately we did buy that property, and now we have removed the home and most of the structures from the site, but the horse barn remains. The horse barn is elevated higher than the house and other structures were. And now we've confirmed that the horse barn is not impacted by the flowage easement areas, as you can see on the map that's attached showing those areas. And given that this horse barn is a very nice facility, we've had quite a bit of interest from renters and potential buyers. Our policy that I guess we've been following is to put those asset lands up for public sale. And given that the joint board owns the property, I guess their thought was the joint board would sort of be the owner that would be selling it off, but we obviously want to make sure that the Diversion's land committee and I think the Diversion board of authority is cool or okay with the recommended sale. And so today we have in front of this committee a recommendation to sell. I think procedurally, if you're willing to consider that, we would ask that you recommend this to the Diversion board, which meets tomorrow. And once that's approved, I would suggest that the joint board can then work with Pipers, who is under contract to handle these things for the project, to actually establish the sale and all the criteria. You'll notice in the letter that Pipers has recommended, and we're supporting their recommendation of doing an online only auction with what's called a soft close. And so that soft close process basically provides flexibility for the buyers as well as us as the seller. The horse barn is very well set up for horse operations. And so if there's somebody buying it for purposes of boarding horses, they may want to purchase some of the adjacent lots for pasture lands and whatnot. Conversely, if somebody wants to buy the barn to store RVs and boats or do something else, they may not be interested in those adjacent lands. And so there could be another buyer for the adjacent lands for hunting, or there are some development potentials in that area as well. So that's kind of a snapshot of the recommendation. Happy to stand for any questions.
Sure. And this is the same policy that we've followed in the past, is it not?
This is the same policy. You'll notice in the cover letter at the end of the first paragraph, I did reference a resolution that the Diversion Authority did pass that sort of firms up the process that we are following for this. The resolution also includes processes to remit any funds that the joint board would receive, remit those funds back to the Diversion Authority.
And is there like a minimum bid on something like this?
So we've had some discussions with Roger and Dan and Steve Link about establishing a minimum. The recommendation has been that we would likely set a minimum. And I guess that we haven't gone through the process of doing that yet. I guess our thought was that maybe the joint board could be engaged in helping set that minimum. We have some documentation, of course, on how much we paid for the horse barn, what was the appraised value, what assets do we need to retain? Obviously, you see on the map there that we do need to retain some storage easements, and so that will likely reduce the value of those properties. And so I think our expectation is we will set a minimum for the barn itself. Not sure if we'll need to do that for the adjacent lots or not.
Okay, and as I recall, this went pretty well when we did it over in Clay County, I think, a couple of years ago. Didn't you know?
Yeah, it was several years ago, but that process did work well. And I think that was actually in-person auction. And nowadays, we're not supposed to do that, so we'll do an online auction.
Sure. Who's got questions? Any questions for Eric on this? Well, if not, I would certainly entertain a motion to recommend to the DA board that we proceed with this recommendation. If someone would make that motion, or any motion you'd like to make.
Brightling, so move.
That's Commissioner Brightling. Is there a second?
Olson seconds.
Thank you, Roger. And any further discussion? Any further discussion? All those opposed say aye. And the motion carries. Okay, thank you very much. Let's go on to item number 6, the post-Clomer outreach to upstream property owners.
Rocky, can you cover that for me?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. This is Rocky Schneider.
Hey, Rocky.
Exciting. We got our FEMA Clomer approved in early September, as I think was updated last month. And what that allowed us to do was send out a decent sized mailing to every property owner that has impacted lands. Just a reminder, the Clomer is a conditional letter of map revision that FEMA gives. It's really their review of the model that we use for impacts and also for the benefited area. So I always talk about the Clomer doing two things. One, for the benefiting area, it ensures that the project will provide the protection that we say it will. So for those facing potential future flood insurance issues, this is a very good step. On the upstream side for land acquisition, it also gives us a great milestone snapshot in which to apply the different state and federal requirements into the land. And so we have 4 different upstream mitigation zones. And so anybody that has property that's touching one of those zones should have received a letter. In total, that was approximately about 360 different property owners. So they own multiple properties, so it's more property than that. Thank you. There's the map of where the property was sent. So if you have property that's touched by one of those 4 different colors, you should have received a letter. The important additions to the letter were individual maps showing how their property sits in relation to those different zones, and then what corresponding mitigation is needed for each zone. The other major step that this took was that it assigned a land agent to each property. And so now every property that is impacted should have an individual land agent that they can stay in touch with for the most recent updates, or to take the next step in the acquisition process, or to really better understand how the project does or doesn't impact their property. In addition to the letter to actual property owners, I think about 14 letters went out to local government units, as we call them. So that's every township and city, every political subdivision in that area. And really what we're trying to do is have Joel offer or ask to I think we've done 2 of them so far. It's really important sort of government affairs relations with each of those entities, especially going forward. I know one of the ones he spoke with was Holy Cross Township, and that's a township in the past that we've been unable to have very successful communications with. And so that was really good to see. And I know there's been discussions with others, and that'll continue to be more important as we continue to move forward. And then lastly, there was a 3rd round of mailings that are expected to go out this week. We did have a communications issue with the printer that ended up with a little bit of delay, but that'll be the non-impacted letter. So what we found is when we send these out, the neighbors are very curious, and also those just in the wider community do want to know what's going on. So we pulled the list of everybody who lives basically in this map that you're looking at in the different townships there, and sent them a letter. It's not quite as detailed as an individual property owner gets, but allows them to let them know that there has been, this update to the project, and shows them where they can find the information. So it's, out there and transparent and easily accessible, so that everybody's working off the same information as they're talking to their friends and community members. So I think we're pretty excited. We have gotten some responses from property owners. We expect that to continue to come in, and hopefully they're making contacts with their land agents too, and we start to see more progress from that as well.
So when you have these town hall meetings, considering the pandemic now, are you streaming any of those, or how is that made available to people that aren't comfortable being there in person?
One thing we found, we did host our own public meeting for like the wetland project, but we found over the years that we have a lot more success when it's not a diversion authority meeting, when we go to their local entities. And so for some of them, they are in person still, but I think most of them are working on more virtual options. And so it really depends on the entity. It's not, we're going to go along with whatever, they have as their practice.
Okay, so you're actually going to a township meeting.
Some of them, yes. Yeah.
I mean, rather than having your own public meeting.
Yes, we're not having our own meetings. Yep, they're not diversion hosted meetings.
I see. Okay, great. Anyone else have any questions? Anything else, Rocky?
Nope, that's nothing. Thank you, Mary.
All right. Well, thank you. I think this is great. I know that uncertainty for those people, so I'm sure it at least helps them to have some information they can start to make plans with. Let's look at item number 7, the flowage easement study update.
Hi, Mary. Eric here again. As you know, we've been trying to get ready to do the phase 2 flowage easement study for quite some time, and been working real closely with Crown Appraisals to get ready to do that work. Just had a good meeting with them yesterday, and working on gathering all the data. There's approximately 700 parcels in the upstream area that will need a flowage easement attached to it or value defined. And so that's a pretty big effort, working to get all the detailed information for Crown to supply that information so they can get going on their study. I do look forward, hopefully next month, to have a task order to get Crown going on that effort. So just wanted to provide the committee that brief update.
Questions for Eric? And Eric, how long do we anticipate that this phase is going to take?
We've had those questions for Crown as well, and I guess I've suggested that it's probably going to be about a year, and their response to that was that's probably a good ballpark for what we know today.
And is it, I assume it's kind of, maybe I'm wrong, that you'd start at one end and work your way along. I mean, kind of like we've done with the property that we have to acquire. So you wouldn't, in other words, all of a sudden have them all done. That you'd be doing some as some would be at the front end and some would be at the end.
So yeah, yesterday when we talked with Crown, we had that exact discussion about how should we expect to deliver these appraised values. There's a lot of parcels along the southern embankment where we need both fee title and for the footprint and a flowage easement. And so there's some debate about how we, if we can try to prioritize those, for example. However, the design work for the southern embankment is not done yet. We're waiting for the Corps to progress through the design in phases. So at this point, I guess I would anticipate that we'll likely get big batches of these flowage easement appraisals. And I think from a property owner standpoint, that might be okay if we sort of present the the values that have been determined, and there's obviously going to be some science behind how those get presented. And obviously appraisal art as well, but I can see where presenting them all sort of in one group could be really effective for the property owners.
Very good. Questions or comments for Eric on this? Such a quiet group. Okay, then we have the committee update for the board meeting tomorrow. Did you want to go through that, Eric? You've got that in front of you.
Yeah, I think it generally shows kind of a quick snapshot of the progress that's been made. And in the past few months, I think this has been something we've tried to prepare so that this could be a sort of a report out from the committee to the board.
Does everybody, does anyone have anything they feel like we should be adding to this? I think it looks very concise, and I appreciate having this for tomorrow's meeting. Okay, then, what about the joint boards update? Roger, or whoever's giving that these days?
Yeah, this is Roger, Mary. Yeah, we're just continuing the process on a lot of these properties. I think tomorrow we're going to have a pretty busy agenda. And again, the horse barn sale, I think that's a good way to do it. It's an open sale, and it really doesn't come to an end until 5 minutes have passed without a bid. So I think it's a good way to do it. And yeah, the joint board doesn't have any issues at this time, and we just start continuing our work. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Roger. I appreciate all the time and effort your group puts into this. Does anyone have any questions for Roger? Then we'll move on to the Minnesota update. I know Kevin's not here, but Jenny, did you have an update, or was there anyone else there that was going to speak to that?
Mary, I would just say that the MIC board has not met or is not meeting this month. We are working on a couple appraisals for properties impacted by the Red River control structure. Otherwise, there hasn't been too much activity from the MIC board yet, but there will be eventually.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, we've covered an awful lot of information so far, and you all seem pretty quiet, but if anybody's got anything, just please jump in and ask a question. Item number 11 is actually the fun one. We've got MetroCog's update with the recreation plan, and boy, could we ever use a recreation plan like that right now during this pandemic. Would be, I think it would be wonderful to have this put together. So, Adam, please tell us what your plan is.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me all right?
I certainly can.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start by saying that this has been a really exciting project for both Luke Champa from MetroCog and myself to work on. One that we've spent a number of hours holding different conversations. We've allocated a number of hours for staff time, looking not only at recreation features, but other key amenities along the future diversion corridor. And then also, what's the best potential route to achieve that overall vision developed as part of this plan? And do you have the presentation queued up, or I can bring it up here too? This works, yeah. So if you want to scroll down here a little bit, with the opportunity to create a 30-mile plus greenway, several key points we just want to highlight here is that it would host a wide variety of seasonal recreation that could be utilized both in summer and winter time. We also see the greenway as a way to reinforce the natural landscape and promote wildlife habitats, but also a way to generate economic benefits and really kind of enhancing the brand of the FM area as a whole. If you want to scroll down a little bit more, throughout the course of this plan, in addition to the study review committee meetings that we held dozens of meetings with multiple jurisdictions, organizations, and other stakeholders. And this slide is just meant to highlight some of those potential stakeholders that we did reach out to as part of this plan. Scroll down a little bit more. We've touched on this slide in the past, but the first round of public engagement that we held last year, last summer and fall, including presentations, not only to the jurisdictions that were represented as part of our study review committee, Fargo, West Fargo, Horace, Cass County, but we also did outreach to Moorhead and Clay County, as well as communities like Harwood and Argusville, to make them aware of what we were working on. We also held a number of focus groups, discussions with recreation clubs, economic development representatives, and environmental and educational organizations to get a better sense of some of the needs and desires of these different groups, as well as the community. And then at the bottom there, we did several pop-up booths in Fargo, West Fargo, and Horace, as well as a public open house at the Rusted Recreation Center in West Fargo. And with all this public engagement, we reached out to nearly 400 people during this first round. During the second round, which we held this summer, this included a virtual public engagement meeting in mid-June, and then we developed an online survey to get some further feedback on the draft plan. And through both of these events, we reached out to approximately an additional 150 people. So about 550 total people that we were able to reach out to as part of this plan. The next two slides just highlight some of the typical sections that were developed. The first is along the channel itself, and then scrolling down here is what a potential trail would look like along the southern embankment. Scroll down a little bit more. As part of this plan, we developed 11 different recreation nodes located adjacent to the channel and the southern embankments, really trying to take advantage of the natural resources and development opportunities that could be presented along the Greenway. We can scroll down a little bit more here. Next few slides just show some of the different trail features that could be integrated along the Greenway, with the hopes of potentially a continuous paved mixed-use trail along the entire corridor. We've also called out areas for single, double track courses, ATV use, equestrian trails, as well as a wetland walk along the embankment, as well as an art walk that could showcase local and regional art that would be located adjacent to West Fargo. The next slide, very briefly, we made sure to analyze not only how the different trails would be integrated along the diversion corridor itself, but how they would fit with proposed transportation improvements and the roadways that intersect with the channel itself, and whether some of these are suitable for further trail facilities and whatnot. Next slide, the winter trails. We also looked at integrating snowmobile trails with existing new snowmobile trails with existing snowmobile trails in the area, as well as areas for snowshoeing and cross-country skiing. And then the next one, the vegetation slide here. just working closely with our project partners to develop native planting palettes showing open prairies with varying canopy cover supports those recreation uses, as well as utilizing the wetlands along the embankment. So we spent a bit of time looking at the tangible benefits. Were these recreation nodes and trails to be implemented? And we did find that the Greenway would provide some great benefits to the community that would take the form of both real estate premiums and visitor spending. In total, looking at other projects around the country, it's anticipated that the development of the Greenway would bring in somewhere between $230 and $239 million over a 20-year period. Part of that would come from increased property values, but the other half would really come from that visitor spending. So estimating about $119 million just from visitors coming to the Greenway and experiencing that. Other benefits of the Greenway that we looked at. The first is if you want to scroll down a little bit here. The first is really that it would really support public health. We found that people who live near open trail systems tend to be healthier and suffer less from chronic diseases such as obesity or diabetes. Also, we found that this would be a great tool to attract additional employment to the region. And it's been shown that it's a factor from employers when they're selecting locations, that proximity to parks and open space. And then finally, that this would be a good tool to attract workforce talent as well as students to the area. These next slides talk about implementation and what's needed to make the vision that's outlined in this plan a reality. One of the first important steps that we realized is the formation of some sort of governance structure, one that could leverage the existing capacity for existing recreation, cultural and educational institutions in the area. But it would also be one that would need to be in charge of producing really good quality operations and programming, and also be able to promote some of that brand development, and also help with potentially securing funding from different funding streams and ensuring accountability to the public. Some of the potential roles that the plan found for the governing entity, and by no means is this list complete, but one is that it would serve as a point of contact for the P3 developer and Army Corps of Engineers, as well as providing an initial vision for recreation and amenities. Other components is engagement with the local community, managing programming, and potentially assisting with routine operations. But again, by no means are these points set in stone, and this is likely to evolve after plan adoption. But these do give us some insight of what the governing entity may need to be involved in. So, as a potential recommendation here on the next slide going down, the study does note that our organization, MetroCog, may be best suited to serve as a lead governing entity at this time. However, we do want to stress that our organization does have limited existing capacity to take on this role, and that a number of different conversations will need to continue here beyond the point where this plan is adopted before an alternative is decided upon. But in the end, though, the governing entity, whatever form that takes, will still be working and coordinating with a number of programming and maintenance partners. This including North Dakota Parks and Recreation, the park districts, as well as other nonprofits and other organizations. The last few slides here look at some of the planning level cost estimates for each of the 11 nodes, which does come to approximately $56 million in 2020 dollars. But this is over a 35-year plus time frame and includes implementation and maintenance costs. So just to note that. We also developed some probable construction costs for trails for the different segments, the rural, kind of the more rural areas, the urban, and as well as the embankment. And those costs come out to about $15.3 million in the long term. And then lastly, the next few slides here show some of the implementation steps moving forward. In the short term, these include, again, establishing that governing entity and ensuring that that is in place, as well as working with recreation and other partners on agreements for potential programming and maintenance, and also participating in some of the initial maintenance roads and trail design, at least being parts of those conversations. Midterm, so the couple of steps here include potentially completing what could be a complete paved multi-use trail, and then also continuing to work on some of the programming and marketing for the Greenway. And then lastly, for some of those long-term implementation steps, measures over the next 20 to 35 years, those include kind of completing some of completing creation of some of those computer developments and continuing to work with programming, operations, and maintenance. So before I conclude, there's two things I'd like to note. First is we are aware that there have been some conversations, the thought of North Dakota Parks and Recreation perhaps taking on a larger role than what was maybe identified in this plan. We have spoken to them, and we do have a meeting with them here in about a week and a half, just to touch base with them to see if any of their positions have changed. So we're looking forward to have a conversation with them to see if there's been any additional conversations about their role here in the future Greenway. And I'd also like to note that we did make some minor adjustments to some of the text of the plan here based on the recommendations of MetroCog's policy board, and those recommendations were integrated into a final plan here last week, but that it's not currently on our website. But just wanted to let you know that those make you aware of those changes and let you know that those have been made. But with that, if you have any questions or comments, be happy to take them at this time.
Thanks, Adam. That's really, really intriguing. Who's got questions? A lot of information there. I know there's so much potential for this, and how it gets organized is, I think, going to be really important. I'm glad to hear that you're talking to the North Dakota Parks. I noticed on your list that you have Cass County as a source, but I would also mention that Cass County actually has its own park board, and our own funding for that. Commissioner Breitling and all the Cass County commissioners are on that park board, as are some other private citizens. And that entity operates the Brewer Lake campground. So I didn't even know that until I got appointed to that board, but there's a nice little recreation area northwest of Castleton that we operate every summer. So, but that's neither here nor there. But I just think as we look at how we're going to put together this governance model, it's really some thorough thought by everyone that's engaged in this, because it does have so much potential, and I think it's really important. A lot of local input. I'm certain that there will be a lot of civic organizations that would love to see this be developed. And it seems like you've hit on so many different areas, from recreation, horseback riding, arts, and the environment, something in there for everyone. So, comments from anybody else? Questions? Okay. Well, thank you. We look forward to more updates. I know this is going to be, we got to get flood protection taken care of first, but this is a nice thing to be able to look forward to as well. Thank you to you and your team both. All right, moving on to item number 12. Is there any other business? Okay, our next meeting is November 18th. I believe it's planned to be virtual again, and I just hope and pray everybody stays safe there, and we will see you next month. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.